There may be those still downstairs that will be coming up shortly. But we're going to have a good time together anyway as we fellowship in the truth of God. I want to begin by saying that God is preparing a people who will represent Him in these last days. And that's why we need to study these things. That's why we need to understand them and go a little deeper than perhaps we usually do, because it is God's way of preparing our minds for what He wants us to do in these last days. Now, this message is entitled, How the Bishops Manipulated Congress, and it's almost hard to come up with the right title, because in a way they have been doing it for some time and they will continue doing it in the future. But it's not just Congress. The whole of the United States is being manipulated and controlled in some cases. For instance, I have a sermon that I do, which I won't be doing today, but it's another message that has to do with the United States leadership. President Obama, for most of his adult life, has been managed by the Jesuit organization. I don't know if you realize this, but after he was when he graduated from university, he was hired to work for an organization called the Gamaliel Foundation. Now, Gamaliel is, you remember in the Bible, Gamaliel, who basically told the apostles, you know, if this is of God, or rather the Jewish leaders, that if this is of God, it'll die out, and if it's not, you can't do anything against it. So, you know, be careful what you do, otherwise you might be fighting against God. This is wise Gamaliel. Well, what they've done is the Roman Catholic Church has established a liberal organization known as the Gamaliel Foundation. They're promoting liberal agendas. Well, Obama began to work for them and ended up working for them for 20 years. It is an organization that does what they call community organizing, which basically means, in essence, and I've documented this from their own website, which basically means that they encourage Americans in large city urban churches to disconnect from the United States government in terms of their emotions and in their philosophy. What they're trying to do is to get people to think of the United States as becoming Babylon of all things. And if you're going to come out of Babylon, you have to come into this some sort of an isolation from the United States. You know, you live here, but you're not really part of it. What they're doing is transferring loyalties to Rome. You understand what I'm saying? They're taking them away from your loyalty to your government and transferring your loyalty to another higher spiritual power, so to speak. Anyway, that's what community organizing is all about. I'm getting feedback, John. And their effort is to do this on a long-term basis. And they recruit people to do this, to create this dissatisfaction in the minds of people by going to talk to them and visiting with them and, you know, fellowshipping with them. And they're using urban churches to do this. A lot of Pentecostal and evangelical churches, etc., especially in the larger urban cities. Well, anyway, the leader of this organization is a Jesuit named Gregory Galuzzo. It is funded by the Catholic Church, and therefore Obama's salary was funded by the Catholic Church for 20 years. 24 years, actually, to be more exact. But when he began to run for for the Senate, and then eventually for the presidency, he knew that he had a problem with the bishops. Because the bishops are very strong on certain social issues, like abortion, and like stem cell research, gay marriage, and those things. You know, the bishops have a very conservative stand, whereas the Gamaliel Foundation does not. And you say, well, how is it that the Jesuits can work against the church? They're not working against the church. Remember, the Jesuits will work both sides of a political issue. They will become champions of both sides, so that in the end they are close to whoever wins the argument or whoever wins the election. No matter who is in charge, the Jesuits are close by. Well, when it came time to run for president, Obama knew he had a problem with the Catholic bishops, because that meant that he had a problem with Catholic voters. So he organized what he called the Roman Catholic Advisory Committee. And the Jesuit magazine America published the list. And when I got my hands on the list, I decided I was going to do some research, find out who they were, where they studied, and what their work is now. And I found out that the majority of them are high-powered Roman Catholics, very close to the centers of power in the Roman Catholic Church. These were his advisors. They're all liberals like he is, of course, but they are advising him on how to work with the Roman Catholic hierarchy and how to appeal to Catholic voters, which is what he did. He did it successfully, obviously, because he became president of the United States. They call it a kitchen cabinet. This committee was stacked with powerful Roman Catholics. And as I went back and did the research, I discovered that the majority of them were trained in Jesuit institutions. Many of them, not a majority, but many of them teach in Jesuit institutions, even now. And in essence, he was being advised, if you can put it that way, by Jesuits, or at least Jesuit-controlled individuals. So for 20 years he worked for the Catholic Church. Nobody really knew this. You know, there's a lot about Obama that you don't know. Now you know a little more. And then when he ran for president, he brought in people into his organization that were very involved and very close to the Roman Catholic hierarchy, many of whom are probably Jesuits. Now, most Jesuits don't tell you that they're Jesuits unless they're openly working as Jesuit priests. They don't actually tell you whether they're Jesuits or not, because they don't put S.J. behind their name. But that doesn't mean they're not Jesuits. They may be operating in disguise as a lawyer, or as you may know, Congress has 150 Roman Catholics as it is. The current Congress, out of 535, that's 30%. Of those 150 plus or minus Roman Catholics in Congress, 54 of them are Jesuit trained in Jesuit institutions. Most of them trained at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., which is the oldest Jesuit institution in the United States. And of course, as you know, it's close to the centers of power in the United States as well. The Jesuits trumpet their success in Catholic media in influencing Congress. And by the way, just to show you how this has developed over the years, 30 years ago there was one Jesuit in Congress, and he was an open Jesuit priest. His name was, I think, Robert Drennan. He's no longer there. In fact, he's dead now. But 20 years ago, there were 8 Jesuit-trained members of Congress. 10 years ago, there were 26 members of Congress that were Jesuit-trained, and now it is 54. So, or at least it was 54. Things changed slightly, and maybe some things have changed slightly, but it'll be in that range. The point I'm trying to make is that, as you can see, over 30 years, Congress has not only increased in the number of Roman Catholics, but also in the number of Jesuit-trained Roman Catholics in Congress. I could also cite the Supreme Court. It's interesting how that over the last 30 years, not even that, the court has gone from a majority of Protestants